Another dark weekend lies ahead for the country. Stage 5 power cuts will continue until tomorrow morning. Stage 4 will then kick in until Sunday morning, followed by Stage 3 until Monday morning. Eskom says it's likely that Stage 3 load shedding will remain for most of next week. Will we ever find our way out of the darkness? Let's unpack our electricity woes with energy analyst Ruse Moleshe. Thank you very much for speaking to us this evening. So, constrained diesel supplies have been triggered, as have been said, that's the reason for Stage 3 continuing for the most of next week. Lots of questions about whether those constrained supplies are likely to continue and then what happens from there. But South Africans at this stage are becoming more and more disillusioned, more and more fed up, less likely to accept all the different reasons Eskom is giving us for these continued load shedding bouts. If things don't ease up soon, what do you see happening socially?
If things don't ease up, good afternoon or evening to the viewers and yourself, Annie. If things don't ease up, obviously South Africans have been going through a lot with respect to infrastructure that is not working in line with what it's supposed to be, as well as the costs of living that are continuing to hit us. I think that South Africans are reaching a point where really the struggles are now going to be a sore point. I don't know what they will do, but definitely they are feeling the pinch.
Talk to us about the escalation in the stages of load shedding that we've seen over the past week. Things went from Stage 2 pretty much to Stage 4 and almost straight away to Stage 5, which has now been in place for a number of days. What do you think is behind this and what should we read into it?
The escalation is related to unplanned outages. They are really enormous in terms of the system. Many of the power generation plants are not functioning as they are supposed to, and the logistics and costs related to diesel are an issue. So what the Eskom needs to do to protect the system is so that the demand doesn't outweigh supply. They then reduce the demand by load shedding. So this is what is happening. They have to load shed in order to manage the system that it does not crash, for lack of a better word.
Cabinet held a meeting to assess the situation. They were supposed to brief the South African public. However, last night, that briefing was summarily cancelled. What do you make of that?
I think that there are limited options in terms of an intervention, given that we have not been able to manage the breakdowns in terms of the power plants. We should have been on top of the reliability maintenance with respect to those power plants, because the capacity is there. However, the plants are not functioning in line with what they are supposed to. So in terms of building new capacity, obviously that will take time. They are looking at options to buy power from the region, to buy power from whatever IPPs are able to bring in that power. That is not going to be sufficient. So it's difficult, because it's going to be difficult for Cabinet to come up with a new story besides the story that the President has given us, or the plan that the President had given us. But in terms of timelines, it's going to be difficult to manage and promise that load shedding will not be with us intermittently over time.
Over the past few days, various figures have spoken out about the load shedding. Former President Thabo Mbeki, also former statistician General Padi Lehotla, both of them saying that politicians should not be interfering in the running of Eskom and that we should leave that to the engineers. Do they have a point?
To an extent, they have a point, but given where we are now, with respect to the crisis, the politicians obviously do have a role to play. Decision-making in terms of what can happen will rest with Cabinet to support Eskom. But to an extent, they are also right. In the past, Eskom used to have autonomy, and it was run very well with credible leaders. So we have surpassed that period of time. We are now here and there needs to be a solution. And that solution will now, given the crisis they have financially, given that there's new capacity needed, so all different cabinet ministers have different roles to play in that regard.
So we can't look at our energy crisis in isolation. We have to look at the global picture for some level of context as well. We've seen a number of European countries returning to their coal-fired energy plants that had been shut down and decommissioned, returning to those coal-fired power plants in the wake of the Ukraine crisis, shortages of energy provision, Russia just simply not sharing energy or providing energy as they used to do. And I want to talk specifically about a comment made by former Statistician General Padi Lehotla, where he said that given that fact or that context globally, we should take the money from IPPs and use it instead for maintenance of Eskom. We shouldn't be looking at renewables at this stage because, you know, far too much money is being pumped in that direction when clearly we should be trying to look at stabilizing and maintaining coal-fired power stations.
For the system to be reliable and we have security of supply, it is correct that we need the coal-fired power plants. There is no other way in which we can have a reliable source of energy without making sure that the power plants are reliable and they continue to supply power. They have a role to play in terms of baseload capacity. And that would reduce our need for diesel, which is expensive and heavy in terms of the Eskom system, which already has financial constraints. So to that extent, I would agree. From a renewable energy point of view, the reason why we have renewable energy in the system is more for environmental reasons rather than as a security of supply measure. Because as you would know, they do have intermittent supply of energy, and where the sun does not shine, sometimes you don't get enough capacity coming from those. So because our most urgent need is for security of supply, it's important to make sure that those plants are not intermittent themselves.
With a lot of information coming to ordinary South African consumers about what is behind the crisis, with their own family worries pressing very heavily on their shoulders, families just merely trying to survive, the situation can seem very overwhelming and very hopeless. What can you say to South Africans that can give them some sense of courage for the long term? Because we've been told load shedding is going to be with us until at least 2025. If it's with us in the form of stage 5, like it has been this week, it seems a very bleak picture. So lift our spirits if you can.
I think what we can do as South Africans, those South Africans which can afford alternatives, that is the route we need to take as South Africans that can afford. Obviously, there are South Africans who cannot afford. The other aspect that we can help with Eskom is to reduce the demand. So those are all, a combination of things, and they all will help to a certain extent only, because what we do need is the baseload capacity. But we can reduce some of our consumption to make sure that we assist Eskom at least to manage what they are doing. The other issue, I guess, would be for the private sector that has the capacity and they have the financial resources to be able to build their own infrastructure, to be able to do that so as to relieve Eskom of these burdens as they sort out the matters that they really need to urgently pay attention to and resolve. There is no other way. I know you said must encourage, but we need to have that capacity working. Yeah.
Just on that issue, before I let you go, do you think that the red tape is restricting the private sector from getting involved to the level which they perhaps have the potential to?
I think that there have been good measures that the government has implemented to try and help the private sector to bring in capacity. The only thing is that obviously it will take a little bit of time. From the licensing regime, which used to be very onerous on the private sector, now that regime is a little bit better, from allowing the private sector to procure as much as they can. And this is outside. I'm not talking about the private sector which sells to Eskom. I'm talking about the private sector which uses power for their own generation, thereby reducing at least the need, the extent to which they will get power from Eskom. So all of those measures need to come to play. Also, the buying of power from the region that we are talking about, expediting those from a red tape point of view would be welcome. So all hands on deck, really, because we have a crisis.
Excellent. Thank you so much for speaking to us and for your insights. That was energy analyst Ruse Moleshe speaking to us about continuing load shedding, the prospects there that stage 3 may continue all throughout next week.